The scanner hummed to life, doing what scanners do, sweeping a precise band of green analytical light across the bag's contents, cataloging each item with efficient, bureaucratic thoroughness. Standard clothing. Check. A data pad. Civilian grade. Check. Ration bars of the compressed, nutritionally complete variety that taste like nothing and sustain everything. Check. A small folded photograph. Paper. Organic. Photographic emulsion. Flag briefly. Categorized as sentimental personal item. Cleared. Check. Then the scanner reached something metallic near the bottom of the bag. What followed was not a beep. It was every alarm in Base 7 deciding, simultaneously and with great enthusiasm, to express itself at maximum volume. Red emergency lighting flooded the inspection area. The scanner's gentle analytical hum transformed instantly into a sound I can only describe as a mechanical scream, the kind of noise that, on my homeworld, is associated exclusively with structural failures and things falling from very great heights. Emergency blast shield began their automated descent from the ceiling with a grinding mechanical groan. Somewhere beyond the doors, I heard Thex's voice rising in pitch as he demanded, over the general noise, to know what was happening. I slapped the console. This accomplished nothing, but it expressed something. Computer! I shouted over the cacophony. Report. What did you find? The main screen flickered. Text began scrolling, red font against black, the color combination reserved, in our system's visual language, for things that required immediate specialist consultation and possibly prayer. Alert. Legendary class artifact detected. Composition analysis complete. Primary material, meteoric iron nickel alloy. Forging method, pattern welding, estimated 300+ layers. Molecular structure, exceeds modern fabrication standards. Classification, legendary tier material. Estimated value, cannot be calculated. Recommended action, immediate containment and specialist consultation. I read this once. Then I read it again. Then I looked at Mara Vulova, who was standing approximately 1 meter from a scanner that had just classified the contents of a bag as a priceless artifact requiring specialist containment. She looked mildly inconvenienced by the noise, the way a person looks when a fire alarm interrupts an otherwise unremarkable afternoon. She was not worried. She was merely waiting for the noise to stop so she could get on with her day. Computer, I said carefully, in the measured tone I reserved for situations where I suspected either the technology or my own mind had malfunctioned. Run the scan again. Your results are clearly the product of a calibration error. Scan repeated. Results identical. Legendary meteoric material confirmed. I hit the emergency silence control. Bless. Comparative quiet fell over the bay like a physical thing. I looked at the screen. I looked at the bag. I looked at Mara. Miss Vulova, I said, I'm going to need you to explain, very carefully and very slowly, what exactly you have in that bag that is causing my scanner to have what I can only describe as a complete existential crisis. She blinked. The expression was perfectly neutral. My knife. Your knife. Yes, my knife. Is there a problem? I gestured at the screen, where legendary meteoric material continued to pulse with the enthusiasm of a sign that had been waiting its entire operational life to display those particular words. My scanner, I said, seems to believe that your knife is composed of materials that should not exist outside of a planetary core or museum vault with armed guards. So yes, Mara, there's perhaps a small, moderately significant problem. She reached into the bag. I will not pretend that my hand did not move toward the emergency response panel. It did. I stopped it. She pulled out a knife. It was perhaps 20 centimeters long. The blade was slightly curved, with a quality to its geometry that suggested it had been shaped by something other than algorithmic precision. There was intention in the curve, a subtle asymmetry that spoke of judgment rather than calculation. The handle was wood, wrapped in cord that had been replaced at some point, the wrapping tight and confident. The blade itself was extraordinary in a way that was difficult to articulate. The metal carried a rippling pattern like frozen water, layers upon layers compressed into something that caught the light and returned it changed. It looked old. It looked used. It looked, for all of that, absolutely perfect. This, Mara said, holding it up and turning it with the casual ease of someone handling an object they have been handling their entire life, is just knife. Family heirloom. My great-grandfather made it. I use for cutting things. Rope, food, packaging. She tilted her head slightly. Very useful. Legendary meteoric steel, I said. Very useful. I needed Thex. I needed my supervisor immediately and unconditionally because I was not equipped, academically, professionally, or spiritually, to handle whatever the universe was staging in my inspection bay. I pressed the call button with enough force to make my concern felt through the hardware. Thex arrived in under a minute, which told me he had been monitoring the alarm situation from the corridor and had already sensed that something was wrong in a way that transcended routine wrongness. My supervisor was a Quilvin, which meant he came equipped with 4 arms, compound eyes that process visual information from several directions simultaneously, and a particular brand of patience that develops in a person who has spent decades managing systems, personnel, and situations that regularly defied expectation. He was, in most circumstances, the calmest individual I had ever worked alongside. He stopped in the doorway. His eyes, all 4 of them, moved from Mara to the knife in her hand, to the still flashing readout on my screen, and back to me. 2 of his hands rose slightly, involuntarily, in what I recognize as a Quilvin gesture, for I need a moment to process this. "Vose," he said. "What?" "Human," I said, pointing at Mara. "Knife." The scanner says it composed of impossibly rare meteoric material forged using methods we cannot replicate. She says her great-grandfather made it in a place called Siberia. I am having a day. Thex approached slowly. He examined the readout with the focused attention of someone reading a document they desperately hoped contained a clerical error. Then he turned to Mara with the careful, deliberate manner of someone who had learned, through long experience, that sudden movements rarely improve complex situations. "Miss Vulova," he said, "would you permit me to examine the blade? Briefly, it will be returned." Mara considered this for a moment, not with suspicion, I thought, but with a natural hesitation of someone being asked to hand over something they genuinely cared about. Then she offered the knife, handle first. "Is fine," she said, "but please be careful. Has sentimental value." Thex accepted the knife with both right hands, holding it with a precise, deliberate care of someone who had just been told the object might be more valuable than the station's annual operating budget. He turned it slowly, examining the rippled pattern in the metal, the worn smoothness of the handle, the way the edge caught light. "Vose," he said quietly, with a specific intonation that meant do exactly what I say and ask questions afterward. "Get the molecular scanner, the one from the vault." I did not argue. The portable molecular analysis unit lived in a secure compartment at the far end of the inspection wing. We used it for unknown alien artifacts, potential biosafety incidents, and, once, a substance that turned out to be contraband crystallized spice worth more than the ship carrying it. It was not equipment we deployed casually. 5 minutes later, we had it assembled on the examination platform. Mara watched the setup process with a mild, patient interest of someone waiting for bureaucratic procedure to conclude so that she could eat lunch. I initialized the scan sequence, and Thex placed a knife on the examination surface. 3 minutes of silence followed. In my memory, those 3 minutes occupy a disproportionate amount of space. The analysis compiled. The results appeared. Material, iron-nickel alloy with trace cobalt and phosphorus. Origin, extraterrestrial. Consistent with octahedrite meteorite classification. Forging method, pattern welding. Multiple folding process. Estimated 300-plus layers. Temperature required, approximately 1,400 degrees Celsius. Method, manual hammer forging. Age, approximately 180 standard Earth years. Condition, functionally perfect. No measurable molecular degradation. Edge retention, exceptional. No sharpening evidence in service life. Thex's mandibles clicked together, the Quilvin equivalent of a nervous laugh, or perhaps a sound made when the nervous system encounters information it is not prepared to integrate. "Manual hammer forging," he said softly. "They hit space metal with a hammer." "Not for fun," Mara offered, helpfully. "For purpose. Great-grandfather needed good knife. Meteor provided good metal. So, logical solution." Logical. I repeated, the word leaving my mouth with no particular inflection, because all my inflection had been temporarily suspended. I pulled up the Human Cultural Database on my secondary screen. I was looking for context. What I found was not comforting. Human metallurgical history, overview, Bronze Age, 3,300 to 1,200 BCE manual smelting and casting. Charcoal furnaces. Iron Age, 1,200 BCE, 500 CE bloomery furnaces, manual forging. Medieval period, 500 to 1,500 CE pattern welding, crucible steel, Damascus techniques, all manual. Industrial Revolution, 1760 to 1840 CE mechanized production emerging, though quality manual work continued. Modern era, traditional techniques maintained alongside advanced manufacturing. Considered cultural heritage. Note, humans work with dangerous materials at lethal temperatures for over 5,000 years before standardized safety protocols. Note, many traditional techniques still in active practice. Handcrafted items frequently exceed modern manufacturing standards. Thex. I said, my voice at a volume I typically reserve for reading documentation to myself. Look at this. He leaned over. I watched his color shift. Quilvin skin responds to emotional state, and has went from its normal healthy blue-green to something considerably paler. 5,000 years, he said. 5,000. I confirmed. They have been doing this for 5,000 years. Voluntarily. We looked at each other. We looked at Mara. She was standing with a relaxed posture of someone who had been waiting a reasonable amount of time, and was beginning to wonder when the waiting would end. Please continue your story, Thex said, with the tone of a person who has decided that understanding the full scope of something terrible is preferable to not understanding it. Mara brightened. There was something genuinely warm in the way she settled into telling it, the posture of someone who had told this story before, who loved it, who had inherited it along with the knife itself. So, she began, great-grandfather's name was Dmitri. He was blacksmith in small village outside Chelyabinsk, very cold place, very remote, very far from anything that was not also cold and remote. One winter night in 1843, he hears enormous noise, sees bright light across the sky. She paused for effect, though I do not think she was aware of it. Meteor. Of course, I said, already seeing where this was going, already dreading it, already unable to stop. Big one, lands maybe 2 kilometers from village, still smoking. She looked at us with a mild expectation of someone about to explain something obvious. So he goes to look. Naturally, Thex said faintly, he takes sled, takes tools, goes into forest in middle of the night to find smoking crater from space rock that just fell from sky. She said this without any apparent awareness that it was remarkable. He finds chunk of meteor, maybe 15 kilos, still warm from entry. He wraps it in blankets, brings it home. There was a pause. He touched it, I said carefully. The meteorite, while it was still warm from atmospheric entry. Well, he had gloves. Mara gestured, as if this settled something. Thick ones. I did not immediately know what to say to this, so I said nothing and made a note that the database entry about human relationships with hazardous temperatures might benefit from additional supporting evidence. So Dmitri, he studies a metal, she continued. Tests it. Very hard, very strong, very beautiful when worked correctly. He decides this is special material. This deserves something special. She spread her hands slightly. He builds very hot fire. Uses bellows for many hours to reach correct temperature. When metal is ready, he hammers, folds, hammers again, folds again, over and over, creating layers, creating strength. Takes him 3 weeks, every day, all day, heating, hammering, folding, shaping. 3 weeks, I said, of manual labor, to make one knife. To make perfect knife, she corrected, gently but firmly. He wanted layers for strength, for flexibility, for beauty. She traced one finger along the rippling pattern on the blade with quiet reverence. Each line you see, that is many layers compressed together. Each layer is a day of work, a decision, a judgment. This is craftsmanship. This is art. She paused. This is legacy. I stared at the pattern. I had looked at it before as data, as a structural phenomenon to be analyzed and categorized. Now I looked at it differently. Each wave in the metal was a record. A day. A man in a frozen village, alone with a fire and a hammer and a piece of the sky, deciding that this thing would be worth the effort. Deciding that someone he would never meet, in a future he could not imagine, would be glad he had taken the time to do it right. Thex had gone very quiet beside me. "Computer," I said at last, typing into the search interface. "Explain human pattern welding technique. Plain terms." Pattern welding, an ancient technique involving the repeated heating, folding, and hammering of multiple metal layers, creates superior tensile strength, flexibility, and edge retention, requires precise temperature control, physical endurance, and skilled judgment developed through years of practice. Extremely labor-intensive, once considered a lost art in most civilized metallurgical traditions. Human exception, never discontinued, still actively taught, still in regular practice, still considered a standard craft discipline, still consider it normal. I read aloud. "Is normal," Mara agreed, without irony. "Miss Vulova," Thex said, his voice carrying the particular flatness of someone maintaining composure through an act of will. "Do you understand what you are carrying? Not sentimentally, objectively. Our best fabricators, working with molecular assembly equipment and computational precision, would struggle to reproduce what your great-grandfather made with a hammer and a fire in a century and a half ago. We could analyze this blade for months and still not fully understand how the edge has retained its geometry without degradation." Mara absorbed this. "Is good knife," she said. "Dmitri, he made good edge. My mother used this knife for 50 years. Still sharp when she gave it to me. I have had it 20 years. Still sharp." She considered the blade with the thoughtful affection of someone regarding an old friend. "Why make something that gets dull? Why make something that breaks? If you are going to make something, make it so it lasts." She looked up at us. "This is what my family believes." I felt something shift in my thinking, quietly but irreversibly, like a tectonic plate making a small but permanent adjustment. "How many humans," I asked, slowly, "have objects like this? Just casually, in their luggage, on their persons?" Mara thought about it. She thought about it the way someone thinks when asked to estimate something they have never needed to quantify before, because it had never occurred to them that anyone might find it unusual. "Most, I think," she said finally, "everyone has family tools. Things passed down. My brother has a hammer from our great-great-uncle, still the best hammer he has ever used, he says. My cousin has a cooking pot from our grandmother that she uses every single day. We keep things." She shrugged, a single simple motion. "We use things. Why throw away what still works?" Thex made a sound I had never heard him make before. It was the sound of a person whose understanding of a situation has just been comprehensively and irreversibly rearranged. "Vose," he said, "I am going to need you to approve her cargo clearance." "Yes." "And then I am going to need us to check every other human vessel currently docked at this station." "Yes." "For reports." "For reports." I agreed, though we both understood perfectly well that the reports were not the reason. "Let me tell you something about myself before we begin, because context matters, and I have learned the hard way that nothing in this universe makes sense without it. My name is Vose. I have worked customs at Port Vexeron for 17 cycles. 17. I have processed cargo from 42 registered species, confiscated 17 categories of contraband, survived 3 labor disputes, 2 attempted briberies, and 1 incident involving a live specimen of something that should not, by any reasonable definition of biology, have been alive. I speak 4 to 7 languages. I hold dual certifications in xenobiological hazard assessment and molecular material analysis. I have been commended twice by the station director and formally reprimanded 4 times, which I consider a respectable balance. I do not enjoy my job. I am aware my attitude needs adjustment. I will not be adjusting it today. The morning shift opened like every other rotation that had come before it, aggressively mediocre. The coffee from the machine at the end of the corridor tasted like someone had boiled recycled hull polymer and cold a beverage. The overhead lights in Bay 7 flickered at precisely the interval most likely to trigger migraine. My supervisor, A deeply anxious Quilvin named Thex had already delivered his morning sermon about processing quotas while I stared past his compound eyes at the middle distance and thought about nothing in particular. I had settled into my chair, a chair engineered, I was certain, by someone who had never once experienced physical discomfort and was therefore unable to prevent it, when the console beeped. I glanced at the incoming vessel registry. Human transport. I leaned back and exhaled through all three of my respiratory valves simultaneously, which is the equivalent, for my species, of a very long, very tired sigh. Now, before you form assumptions about my character, let me be precise. I do not dislike humans on principle. My feelings about them are entirely professional, rooted in specific and recurring patterns of behavior that I have documented across hundreds of encounters. They are a young species, perhaps 200 of their years in the galactic community, which in cosmic terms is barely a moment. Less than a moment. It is a galactic equivalent of someone arriving late to a party, knocking over the refreshments table, apologizing with great charm and sincerity, and somehow ending up being the most interesting person in the room. They arrive in ships that clang when they dock. They use a language that has 17 distinct meanings for the word run and constructs its plural forms with the systematic logic of a fever dream. They carry, as personal sidearms, devices that accelerate small metal projectiles using controlled chemical explosions, which is a sort of thing that sounds made up until you see one, and then sounds like it was made up by someone with a very specific and concerning set of interests. They are, taken as a whole, baffling. The airlock cycle with a pneumatic is, and she walked in. She was tall for a human, perhaps 6 feet in their imperial measurement system, a system so willfully irrational that I had once spent 40 minutes researching its historical origins and come away more confused than when I started. Dark hair pulled back in what their database is called a ponytail, which was functionally accurate even if the name made no sense. Practical clothing. Boots worn soft at the heel from what looked like genuine use. A leather satchel slung over one shoulder that had seen better decades. And the expression. You know the one. Every customs officer in the galaxy knows the one. It is the expression that says, I have been traveling for 16 hours in a vessel that was not designed with my comfort as a priority. I need food, a shower, and approximately 10 hours of horizontal unconsciousness. I am willing to be cooperative, but I am measuring that willingness against a reserve that is currently running low. Do not waste it. I have seen that expression on the faces of beings from across 30 star systems. On a human. It had a particular quality to it, a kind of compressed patience, like a coil spring that had been wound one full turn past its comfortable limit. Her name, according to the manifest, Mara Vulova. Trader class, independent operator. Cargo, miscellaneous goods, textiles, historical items, and foodstuffs. Historical items. I filed that phrase in the part of my mind that collects warning signs and moved on. Welcome to Port Vexeron, I said, with precisely as much warmth as I was required to project and not a single degree more. Please place all personal items and cargo samples on the scanning platform for standard inspection. This will take approximately 15 minutes of your time, longer if you're carrying anything stupid. She raised an eyebrow. One of them. Humans can do that independently. I have always found it faintly unsettling. Stupid, she repeated. Her accent carried what my translation module flagged as Eastern Slavic phonological roots, though the module was careful to note this was an approximation. Stupid contraband, I clarified. Dangerous materials. Unlicensed biological matter. Weapons above Class 7. That category of thing. I waved a manipulator appendage at the scanning platform with a practiced gesture of someone who had made this speech several thousand times. You understand. Stupid. She almost smiled. It was a small, tired, genuine thing, and I noticed it despite myself. I put my bag down, she said. One moment. She swung the leather satchel onto the platform. I activated the scanner. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was everything that followed. My first mistake, if I'm being truly honest, was waking up that morning. There were 7 other human vessels at Port Vexeron that rotation. 3 cargo haulers, 2 passenger transports, a mining ship, 1 personal yacht. Thex pulled up the security camera feeds while I accessed a cargo scanner remotely, and what followed was 30 minutes of progressive, accumulating revelation that I am not certain my professional career had prepared me for. Camera 3 showed a human man at a food vendor, pulling a small folding knife from his belt to spread something on bread. The vendor's perimeter scanner, visible in the corner of the frame, flagged yellow alert. The man did not notice. He finished making his sandwich, folded the knife close, pocketed it, and went on with his afternoon. Camera 7 caught a human woman opening a shipping package with a simple-looking box cutter. The blade caught the overhead light as she worked, and even through the security feed, the ripple pattern in the metal was unmistakable. She dropped the packaging in a bin, tucked the cutter into her jacket, and walked on, whistling something tuneless and cheerful. Camera 12 was, if anything, the most affecting. A human in engineer's overalls was tightening a bolt on a piece of atmospheric equipment in the maintenance corridor. He was using a wrench, an ordinary, worn, completely unremarkable wrench that he handled with the easy familiarity of an object that had been in his hand so often it had become an extension of him. Our materials database pinged automatically when the camera angle shifted, and the identification appeared on screen without ceremony. High-carbon steel, hand-forged, estimated age, 85 to 95 standard Earth years. Condition, excellent. Edgeware consistent with regular professional use. The engineer finished his work. He dropped the wrench back into a canvas tool bag that probably contained enough classified artifact and material to fund the station's next infrastructure upgrade. Then he picked up his bag and walked toward the cafeteria, thinking about lunch. They all have them, Thex said. His voice was hollow in the particular way of a person who has just understood something large. They all just carry them, I confirmed. They use them for lunch, for repairs, for opening boxes. We ran the cargo scanner on a random selection of passenger bags from the transport vessel registered as HTR 449. The first bag contained standard clothing, toiletries, a paper book, humans still use these, a fact I had always found charming in an abstract way, and a small metal pot with a lid. Cast iron cookware. Age, approximately 60 standard Earth years. Condition, exceptional. Seasoning layer intact and developed through repeated thermal cycling. Thermal distribution efficiency, 98.7%. Note, this performance level is not achievable through primitive casting methods and should not be possible with materials of this composition and age. A cooking pot, Thex said, 60 years old. I said, it has better thermal properties than our galley equipment. The galley equipment that was manufactured 18 months ago using calibrated molecular fabrication. We looked at each other. The second bag contained more clothing, a device called a thermos that maintained the temperature of liquids through what the analysis could only describe as an exceptionally optimized material selection and construction, not technology, exactly, just physics, understood deeply and applied with precision. There was also a small leather pouch containing sewing needles. Sewing needles. Hand-forged steel. Age, approximately 40 Earth years. Tensile strength, exceeds modern fabricated equivalents by 23%. Wear patterns indicate continuous use. No structural degradation detected. They hand-forged sewing needles, I said, that are stronger than the ones we manufacture. With precision equipment. Yes. By 23%. Yes. The third bag belonged to an engineer named Chen Wei. It contained technical manuals, spare clothing, ration bars, and a leather roll that unfolded to reveal a set of tools arranged with a meticulous organization of a person who took their instruments seriously. The analysis took longer than the others. Tool set, mixed materials, ages ranging from 15 to 85 standard Earth years. Screwdrivers, hand-forged chromanadium steel. Handles modified for ergonomic fit, custom work, not manufactured. Performance, exceptional. Pliers, high-carbon steel. Grip tension calibrated. Pivot worn to perfect smoothness through long use. Adjustable wrench, hand-forged. Owner's name engraved on handle. Chen, grandfather. Manufactured date estimated, 1958 CE. Measuring tape. Spring mechanism still functional after 30-plus years. Accuracy within modern tolerances. Hammer, tool steel head. Hickory handle. Balance coefficient. Neoptimal 4 human grip geometry. Overall assessment. Professional grade tools maintained across multiple generations. collective quality exceeds modern fabrication standards. Several items classify as artifact tier. His grandfather's wrench, Thex said slowly, reading the engraving notation. From 1958. I did the arithmetic. Approximately 170 Earth years ago. And he brought it to space. To use it. On actual equipment. On actual equipment, I confirmed. We went through the other ships. The mining vessel had a cast iron skillet of indeterminate age, over 100 years. The scanner estimated, based on manufacturing marks, that was in perfect working condition and showed evidence of recent use. The tool chests in the cargo haulers contained implements ranging from 15 to 100 years old, every single one of them maintained to a standard that our fabrication systems would have been proud to achieve on a first production run. The small yacht registered to a Park Ji-woo contained a tea set, ceramic, hand-thrown, glazed, fired, 80 years old, used daily, judging by the residue patterns. They inherit everything, Thex said softly, as a realization assembled itself fully. They don't buy replacements. They maintain. They use. They pass things down through generations, and somehow the things only get better with time. He paused, because the things were made to last. Because the people who made them, I said, believe that the people who came after them deserve something worth inheriting. The thought landed in me with unexpected weight. I pulled up the station's 6-month customs log. Then I searched it. Then I sat with what I found. Thex, I said, we have been processing human cargo for 6 months. Yes. How many of these items have we cleared as personal effects? Because they looked old and worn and harmless. He already knew the answer. I could see it in the way his color shifted. All of them, he said. All of them. I confirmed. We have been waving artifact equipment through customs because it looked like junk. Because it was scratched and worn and carried evidence of decades of use, we assumed it had low value. I let that sit for a moment. We had it exactly backward. A new message appeared on my console. Another human ship requesting docking clearance. Cargo manifest, personal effects, trade goods, and household items. Household items. Thex and I looked at each other in the way that people look at each other when they have together understood something that cannot be ununderstood. I am going to need a drink, he said. You don't drink. I am considering making an exception. I was still working through the implications, still trying to calculate the total classified value of what we had been clearing through our station for half a cycle, when movement through the observation window caught my eye. Mara was in the main concourse. She had stopped at a fruit vendor. She was examining something round and orange, turning it in her fingers with a considering expression of someone evaluating quality. She paid, pocketed her change, and then reached to her belt. The knife came out, the legendary meteoric blade, the one that had taken her great-grandfather 3 weeks to forge from a piece of the sky, the one the scanner had classified as a priceless artifact, the one whose molecular structure our best fabricators could not fully replicate. She cut the fruit in half. A single clean motion, no more effort than breathing. She bit into one half, chewing thoughtfully while she walked, and then she did something that should not have surprised me as much as it did. She used the tip of the blade, that extraordinary, irreplaceable, historically significant edge, to dislodge a piece of fruit skin from between her teeth. A toothpick. She was using a legend as a toothpick. I laughed. It came out strange, a sound I didn't entirely recognize as my own, half manic and half something else, something that was closer to relief than I would have expected. Because here was the thing. Here was the thing I had been circling for the past several hours without quite reaching it. We had called them primitives. We, the galactic community, the older species, the ones with molecular fabricators and gravitational compression forming, and centuries of established manufacturing infrastructure. We had looked at humans with their chemical rockets and their paper books and their stubborn, irrational attachment to making things by hand, and we had smiled our patient, superior smiles. We had processed their cargo and tagged their heirlooms as personal effects, no significant value, and waved them through without a second thought. And the whole time, they had been walking among us carrying miracles, not because they were trying to impress anyone, not because they understood the value we would have assigned to what they carried, but because a blacksmith in a frozen village had once decided that if he was going to make a knife, he was going to make it right. Because his daughter had kept it, and her daughter after her, and eventually Mara had carried it across the stars in a battered leather satchel because it was useful and it was Hayes, and it connected her across 180 years to a man she had never met but whose hands had shaped something that still cut true. Value is not always in credits. She had said that, and I had filed it away as a nice sentiment. Now it struck me as something more like a diagnosis. We had been measuring the wrong things. 6 months, 4 longer than that. For however long humans had been docking at Port Vexeron and carrying their heirlooms and their handmade tools and their cast-iron cookware and their grandfather's wrenches through our inspection bays, we had been applying the wrong standard. We had looked for newness and technical sophistication and manufacturing precision, and we had missed the thing that actually mattered: time and care, and the stubborn human conviction that something worth making was worth making to last. Mara disappeared into the crowd, her knife back at her belt, the other half of the fruit in her hand, probably already thinking about wherever she was going next. Thex appeared at my shoulder. He had been watching through the window, too. "I am going to update the custom classification database," he said. "New category, human artisan goods, approach with caution and existential recalibration. Make sure you note the part about not underestimating objects that look old," I said. "For us, wear and age indicate diminished value. For them, it's evidence of sustained worth. And the part about sentimental items. Especially the sentimental items." I thought of the folded photograph in Mara's bag, flagged briefly and cleared. I thought of Chen Wei's grandfather's wrench. I thought of the cooking pot from someone's grandmother, carried across the light years because it made better heat distribution than anything manufactured in the past century. Their sentimental items are where the real work is. Thex stood beside me for a long moment, both of us looking out at the concourse where humans move among the other species of the port, carrying their unremarkable bags full of impossible things. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said finally. "What?" "Dmitri, her great-grandfather." He turned the name over like he was examining it. "He finds a meteorite in the snow in the middle of the night, in 1843, in a place so remote that the nearest city is days away. Here's a blacksmith in a village that has never heard of us, that doesn't know we exist, that couldn't have imagined this station or this port or any of this." He gestured at the bay around us. "And he wraps that rock in blankets and brings it home, and he spends 3 weeks turning it into a knife, and he is thinking, what? About his craft, about doing the work properly, about leaving something behind that will matter." "Yes," I said, "he has been dead for 150 years. He never went to space. He had no idea that one day his great-granddaughter would carry his knife to a station orbiting a different star, and it would trigger every alarm we have." Thex paused. "And he made it anyway, as well as he could, for as long as it would last, for someone who hadn't been born yet." I looked at the space in the concourse where Mara had been standing. "That's what legendary means," I said. "Not the material, not the molecular structure, the intention." I thought about it for another moment. The decision to care about something past the point where caring is convenient. A new ship appeared on the docking registry. Human, independent trader. Cargo manifest, personal effects, tools, and household items. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I pulled up the advanced scanner, scheduled an extended inspection window, and flagged the file for careful processing. Because I had learned something today. Not from a database or a training module or a superior's memo, but from a tired woman with worn boots and a leather satchel who had handed me a piece of the sky and described it as a knife and used it to cut a sandwich and eat a piece of fruit, and disappeared into a crowd without once understanding why I was still staring after her. The scanner beat. I took a breath. Never underestimate the species that looks at a falling star and thinks, "Good material. Let me make something." Lesson learned. Port Vexeron Customs Log, Bay 7. Officer Vos, Cycle 17, Rotation 4, New Classification Protocol initiated. Human artisan goods to receive specialist review. Recommend station-wide training update. Recommend review of all prior clearances, Cycles 1 to 17. Personal note, not for official record. Approved 1 priceless artifact for entry today. It was a knife. She needed it for lunch. I think we are going to be fine.